Welcome to the Economist in Your Ear podcast. Today, we're digging into a really crucial conversation, one sparked by that recent Economist article, America Needs an Honest Reckoning Over Its Spy Agencies.
Right.
This piece, obviously prompted by the U.S. airstrikes on Iran, it raises some pretty profound questions, doesn't it, about the credibility, really, of the U.S. intelligence community.
It really does.
The core issue, as The Economist frames it anyway, is whether America's spy agencies failed in assessing Iran's nuclear threat and, what that means for trusting intelligence reports going forward.
It's a vital topic, absolutely. And, while the article hits on some key truths, I think we'll find the reality is, well, it's far more intricate than it might seem at first glance.
More complex.
Definitely more complex.
Yeah.
Our goal today really is to go beyond just that initial summary. We want to uncover the deeper context, maybe some alternative perspectives, and look at the really nuanced challenges facing the intelligence community right now.
So you, the listener, can get a more complete picture.
Exactly. Hopefully, you'll gain a much more comprehensive understanding of why these debates are so critical and maybe what a truly honest reckoning might actually involve.
All right. Let's unpack this then. The Economist article, it really zeroes in on three main claims.
That's right.
First, it highlights how former President Trump has publicly stated the intelligence community, the IC as we often call it,
Yep, IC,
that they missed an existential threat from Iran. And that led him to question their judgments after the recent strikes.
which is a significant claim in itself.
Huge. Second, the article points to politicization, from presidential disdain right down to figures like the former DNI Tulsi Gabbard, saying this is a major force eroding intelligence credibility.
And that's a recurring theme, isn't it? Politicization.
It is. And third, it argues America desperately needs a frank stocktake, a hard look at its sprawling spy apparatus.
Yeah, and what's truly fascinating here is that while these claims definitely resonate and they contain elements of truth, the article, maybe inevitably, simplifies a much more tangled reality.
How so?
Well, we really need to consider how these issues are deeply interconnected and how history informs this present moment, especially when you factor in fresh data points that have come out just since the article was filed.
Like what?
Like, for instance, the Pentagon now estimating the June 28th raids set Iran back maybe 12 to 24 months. Now, that's a far cry from Mr. Trump's initial claim that they were obliterated.
Right. Obliterated is a strong word.
A very strong word. And this new assessment, it instantly undercuts that White House victory narrative and just shows how fluid these assessments still are. They're still moving targets.
Okay, so let's focus on that first point. The article strongly implies, or at least leans into the idea of, an intelligence failure regarding Iran, especially with Mr. Trump being so public saying his intelligence community is wrong. He said that back on June 16th. But was it really such a clear-cut binary failure?
That's, I think, the million-dollar question here. Was it a failure? If we connect this to the bigger picture, you look at the intelligence community's own language in its March threat assessment. Yeah. It was very careful. It was probabilistic, not categorical. Meaning it stated that Ayatollah Ali Khamenei had not yet, and that's the key phrase, not yet, given the green light for weaponization. But at the same time, it acknowledged Iran's unprecedented stocks of 60% enriched uranium.
So holding two ideas at once, really high risk, but no final decision detected.
Precisely. That phrasing left ample room for alarm, particularly for allies like Israel, without necessarily proving the IC missed some definitive decision to build a bomb. And what's more, even Israeli intelligence wasn't, a single unified voice on this. There were reports in Haaretz and Mariv indicating significant dissent within Mossad over that very point-of-no-return memo.
Right.
The article kind of treats the Israeli view as monolithic, but that masks these crucial internal debates among allies.
That's a really important piece of context.
It is. And what's maybe even more revealing is that Mr. Trump's own trigger for the strike, well, it appears to have been heavily political.
How do we know that?
White House aides reportedly told Reuters that the calculus for the strike weighed things like midterm election optics and pressure from Congress just as heavily as the raw intelligence itself.
Wow. Okay.
So intelligence didn't dictate the action here. It seems it supplied a menu maybe of ambiguous estimates. And that allowed for political interpretation, for political needs to potentially take precedence.
So the core takeaway here sounds like Maybe calling this a binary intelligence failure is a bit simplistic. It kind of conflates the inherent uncertainty in analysis with, well, a political leader choosing the intelligence that fits their preferred narrative.
I think that's a much more accurate way to frame it. It conflates analytical uncertainty with potential presidential cherry-picking.
Okay, let's shift to the second point from the article. The Economist notes Mr. Trump's, let's say, turbulent relationship with America's spy agencies. It cites that Helsinki moment in 2018.
Oh yes, Helsinki.
Where he seemed to side with Vladimir Putin over his own IC's conclusions on 2016 election meddling. He called the IC's assessment devastating. How truly exceptional is this kind of public hostility from a president towards the intelligence community?
Well, his skepticism isn't entirely new in the sense that presidents in the IC have had friction before. That's not novel.
Right.
You can think back to JFK, who blamed the CIA for wishful thinking after the disastrous 1961 Bay of Pigs invasion. That led to a major reorganization, sure, but not really a public thrashing of the agency.
More internal changes.
Exactly. Or think about George W. Bush, who accepted that faulty national intelligence estimate, the NIE, on Iraq's WMD back in 2003. The politicization there, the argument goes, came more from above, particularly via the vice president's office and those infamous stovepipes of information bypassing normal channels.
Okay, so friction isn't new. What is new then?
Here's where it gets, I think, really interesting and maybe unprecedented in the modern era. It's Mr. Trump's public debunking of his own intelligence community.
The sheer visibility of it.
Yes, the visibility. As we saw in Helsinki, and as repeated now regarding Iran, that is unique. And that public performance, if you will, magnifies distrust way beyond just the Beltway insiders. It filters down to the public.
And do we see evidence of that?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Look at the Gallup 2024 data. It's pretty stark. Only 41% of Americans give the CIA a positive rating. Compare that to, say, the U.S. Postal Service, which gets 62%.
Wow, the post office is more trusted than the CIA.
Significantly more.
Yeah.
This highlights that a pretty big trust gap is already baked in with the public, which makes his public statements, his public skepticism, even more impactful. It lands on fertile ground, in a way.
Okay, so the article focuses quite a bit on the Iran intelligence clash and the role of Tulsi Gabbard as DNI. But you mentioned earlier the problems might be deeper. Is credibility bleeding from other wounds too, beyond just this specific Iran assessment?
Oh, absolutely. The challenge is the rot, if you want to call it that. It runs far deeper than just whether spies got Iran's nuclear progress exactly right or wrong. The article, maybe for brevity, misses several critical dimensions here. Well, for instance, workforce churn within the IC. That's a huge concern right now.
People leaving.
Yes, significant numbers. The Office of the Director of National Intelligence, the ODNI, saw its attrition rate hit 11% in fiscal year 2024. That's the highest it's been since 2008.
Why? What's driving that?
Well, reports suggest it's happening amid some politically charged dynamics, even firings. For example, there were reports of 2 senior analysts being removed after they disputed claims related to Tren de Aragua. That's the Venezuelan criminal gang making headlines. That kind of thing sends ripples.
It's a chilling effect, maybe.
Could do. Then you have things like cybersecurity laxes. Major ones.
Right.
Think about the 2022 leak, that Shanghai police-style data dump, or the NSA's own 2023 Eternal Quasar leak, a highly sensitive classified hacking tool getting out. These things illustrate how just one compromised server can deeply embarrass an entire state apparatus. It shows an alarming fragility in systems we rely on.
Okay, so we've got internal issues like staff turnover, morale perhaps, and serious cyber vulnerabilities. But what about the sheer size and structure? Does institutional bloat play a role here too?
Precisely. That's a huge factor, often overlooked. The intelligence community consists of, wait for it, 18 different agencies.
18.
18, each with its own culture, its own budget, its own reporting lines. Add to that 107 different congressional notification requirements every year, and billions spent on potentially overlapping open-source intelligence purchases.
That sounds unwieldy.
It is unwieldy.
Yeah.
The Economist article doesn't really flag this structural issue, but it contributes massively to inefficiencies, turf wars, communication gaps, visibility gaps. It just adds to the overall turbulence inside the U.S. intel ecosystem. You see hints of this in things like the leaked plan suggesting DHS wants to shed 75% of its Office of Intelligence and Analysis.
It's a huge cut.
Massive. So think about it. 18 agencies. It's often less about a clear chain of command or accountability and more like navigating a bureaucratic labyrinth. That can easily lead to paralysis rather than the precision needed for national security.
Okay, this paints a much broader picture of the challenges. The Economist calls for an honest reckoning. Given everything we've discussed, what alternative lenses or perspectives did the article perhaps miss or underplay that are essential for a truly comprehensive look?
Right. A truly honest reckoning needs to look wider. If we connect this to the bigger picture, several things come to mind. One is what you might call security state tribalism.
Tribalism within the IC.
Yeah, these deep-seated loyalties, maybe even groupthink, within different agencies or factions. So you have the example of a Manji-aligned DNI reportedly firing analysts who don't conform. But that mirrors, in a way, earlier critiques from the other side about a deep-state groupthink resisting political leadership. It's arguably two sides of the same politicization coin.
Interesting. What else?
Then there's structural opacity, the sheer secrecy. Tools like the Freedom of Information Act, FOIA requests, or the disclosures from the FISA court, they remain only partial fixes. They give glimpses, but not the full picture.
So, not enough transparency?
Fundamentally, yes. Without more systematic declassification, public trust is probably going to remain stuck in the difficult 40–50% range we talked about. How can people trust what they can't see or understand?
Makes sense.
We also really need to consider congressional culpability here.
Congress's role?
Absolutely.
No.
The very budgets, the legal authorities, the war powers that Congress sometimes decries now, many of those were dramatically expanded after 9/11, often with strong bipartisan support, even zeal. So the current oversight vacuum, you could argue, is partly self-inflicted by Congress itself.
They enabled the current structure.
To a large extent. Now, you see House Democrats vowing hearings on analytic integrity, which is important, but it suggests the oversight focus might again be primarily on politicization, rather than tackling those broader strategic or structural issues we've discussed.
And is there anything else missing from the picture?
One final, really significant factor is the technological shift. This is huge. Commercial satellite companies, open source intelligence OSINT outfits like Planet Labs or Bellingcat, they are increasingly providing insights, sometimes faster and more accurately than classified government sources.
So the government doesn't have a monopoly on information anymore.
Exactly. The IC's traditional role as the sole gatekeeper of crucial intelligence is eroding. That's a profound reality the article barely touches on, but it has massive implications for the future of intelligence gathering, analysis, and dissemination.
That is a lot to consider. It really does reshape how you might view the challenges. So taking all that on board, what would a fuller reckoning, a truly comprehensive one, actually ask? What questions should be on the table?
A genuinely deep reckoning would have to ask some really tough questions like, can we effectively isolate analytic tradecraft, the methods the critical thinking analysts use from partisan political appointees?
How could you do that?
Well, maybe through things like fixed terms for the DNI, so they're not purely political hires, or creating stronger, maybe Inspector General style, protections for analysts who offer dissenting views, or even getting more transparent by publishing public confidence intervals on key intelligence judgments, showing the level of certainty.
Acknowledging the uncertainty.
Exactly. It would also have to ask, should Congress finally rationalize that sprawling 18-agency labyrinth? Could we cut duplication, improve focus, maybe even save money?
Seems logical.
And how do we effectively blend the classified world with this exploding world of open intelligence, of OSINT, maybe by elevating OSINT to be a co-equal discipline within the IC? Or perhaps by having a default policy of declassifying finished analytic products after, say, 90 days, unless there's a compelling, specific reason not to.
Flipping the secrecy default.
Potentially. And maybe the most fundamental question, what is the public's actual tolerance for uncertainty in intelligence? Because intelligence is rarely black and white. And how can leaders better manage that public expectation? Maybe by publishing something like probabilistic scorecards, so you, as citizens, can actually see how forecasts evolve over time, how they mature, how often they're right or wrong.
Building public literacy about intelligence.
Precisely. That could be key to rebuilding trust.
So the bottom line here seems to be that The Economist's call for an honest reckoning is definitely timely, it's on target, but it's also clear the issues run far deeper, are far more complex than just whether spies over or understated Iran's proximity to a bomb at a specific moment.
I think that's right. Trust in intelligence doesn't just falter when a president publicly attacks it or tries to weaponize it. It also falters when agencies hide behind perhaps excessive secrecy, making accountability difficult. And it falters when Congress shouts outrage after a perceived failure, yet continues to sign the checks for the same structures without demanding substantive structural change.
It's a systemic issue.
It really is. Any reckoning truly worthy of the name has to tackle all three of those pathologies. The political interference, the structural opacity, and the congressional oversight gaps. Otherwise, you're right, the next crisis will just inevitably replay the same blame game, stuck on an endless loop.
And this isn't just about political skirmishes inside Washington, is it? It's really about the fundamental foundation of how reliable information informs critical decisions that affect global stability, national security, everything.
Absolutely.
Given everything we've discussed today, this whole complex picture, what stands out most to you? And maybe, for our listeners, how do you think an informed public can realistically push for more transparency and more accountability from the intelligence community moving forward?
That's the critical question, isn't it?
Thank you for joining us on the Economist in Your Ear podcast. We certainly hope this conversation has given you much to consider.